And I hope that you benefited so far or learned a little bit, especially for the newcomer, and you got to know more about it. And if there is an opportunities in the future, hopefully, that you will continue. So Nadira, again, I'm your moderator of the session. The session is diversity and disability on the internet. And maybe many of you heard the word connect the unconnected. But when we look at the urban cities, which we consider they are connected, and we have kind of do a real research, we will find that there is few people, not few, there's many people, some people vulnerable are not able. I'm sorry that didn't put the camera, so let me put the camera. Okay, I'm sorry for that. Those are vulnerable are not able to access. So in this session, we try to kind of get to know more about the issue and how we can engage, how we learn more, or how can we connect those unconnected, really unconnected in the connected areas. So the session for today is kind of split. I wanted to do it differently than the other sessions. I will have it dividing it into 3 parts. The first part, then each speaker will have 8 minutes. Then we'll have a question and answer to that speaker. Then we'll move to the second speaker and the third speaker. So we'll have kind of focus on whatever our valued speaker has to give input. Anyway, if our speaker is not able to, Gayatri Kandati is not able to come, I can move the order. Is she here, Mubashir?
She is there.
She's here. Yeah, welcome, Gayatri. Gayatri Kandati, she's a lawyer with a background in international law and human rights. She's in the Asia Policy Regional Coordinator at the Association for Progressive Communication, APSIG. And yesterday we kind of met her colleagues in the gender work. So Gayatri, she will cover how to make the internet in an inclusive space through a democratic and rights-based approach to ICT policy making and implementation. So may I ask the Dotesha to start the timing and the presentation, to make the presentation ready for the Gayatri? Can you put the presentation, please?
Hello, Gayatri. Would you like to play it on your own, or we should do that?
I mean, if you can do it, it's easier. Or if you want me to do it, I can do it.
In either way, it's convenient for us.
Hold on. I just want to make sure that. Okay, I'll try and keep an eye on the. Sorry, give me a second.
Okay, we have shared the screen, I think.
Yes.
Oh, I've shared the screen.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Only thing is I can't see the chat. So just give me a second. Let me try to.
Yeah.
Let me try. Okay. Will you let me know if something is happening in the chat that needs my attention?
Yeah. I'll be helping you. I'm here to help as well.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So are you going to start my time?
Yeah. Please, can you start the timers? Yes. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Gaia. I work with APC as Nadira said. Before we go further, I would really appreciate it if we could have some conversation going in the chat, because it's really not like a heavy session information wise, because what I want to share with you is more about the thinking about the internet and our attitude towards how different aspects about the internet are. So I would really appreciate it if you could give me some feedback. Yeah. So how about we start sort of with a very simple question. Is anyone in the room out of the 38 odd participants of the opinion that the internet is inclusive? If you think the internet is inclusive, maybe you can just say yes in the chat, or if you feel like it's not like super inclusive, you can probably say no. So that'll give me a sense of what you feel, right? I'm trying to get to the chat, so just give me a second. It's so strange. I'm so used to Zoom, but I'm not able to get to the chat. Give me a second. Well, anyway, any sense from the chat as to whether anybody feels that the internet is inclusive or not? Nadira, maybe can you read out?
Yeah, there is a few, the majority is no, but few they already mentioned yes, but
Yeah?
partially. Some
Okay.
put partially.
Okay. Can maybe someone who's felt that the internet is inclusive, would they be willing to share why they feel it is inclusive? Just unmute yourself. It's totally fine because I can't see the chat, so I can't call on you. Yeah. Are you able to unmute yourself, and or does the format not allow for the participants to unmute? Yeah, Yikwai, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, I think in some rural areas, the infrastructure of internet is not available. So it affects a lot of people from being able to access the internet and tap into the benefits of digitization. So from that aspect, from an infrastructure aspect and perspective, I think it's not equal and it's not inclusive.
Where are you from, Yikwai?
Malaysia.
From Malaysia. Okay, great. Anyone who felt that the internet is inclusive, it's not a judgy space, you know. All of our realities are different, so it's totally fine to have one opinion or the other. Does anyone who felt that it's inclusive, are you willing to share? It's okay if you're not. It's all right. Well, the thing is, like I said, there are many people who kind of, you know, sometimes feel like they're left out of this amazing thing called the internet and technologies that surround it. But what we're going to do is, before we get to who are those people, maybe we can do a very quick check of what is it that you can expect in the next 4 or 5 odd minutes, right? Is the question of how do you think about diversity, and at what stages can we think about diversity, and who are the people that we need to think about when we are talking about diversity. So the first thing is about how we approach internet and the technologies that surround the internet. So one way of thinking about internet is to just think of it as an invention, right? As a way, per se. But another way to think about the internet is to look at it as a public space, as something that belongs to all of us, whoever we are and whatever we are. And so one of the ways to think about the internet could also be try to think of the internet from a people-centric point of view, where you think of internet that's being built by the people and for the people, more essentially, right? And who is this people is something we have to answer for ourselves, but that's one framing. Another framing that is very helpful when we look at the internet is a rights-based approach. Now, this term rights-based approach gets thrown around a lot, and we all feel like it's something, but there's really no clear articulation of what a rights-based approach to ICTs are. But essentially, my understanding of a rights-based approach is to look at the aspirations of people, and more importantly, the implication of technologies on the rights of individuals. There are not very many instances, even today, when a rights-based assessment is done or a rights impact assessment is done to different technologies, whether it is surveillance technology or even development of either digital tools or digital spaces. By tools, I'm referring to specific mechanisms or rather inventions. And by spaces, I mean perhaps something like social media platforms and the larger web in that sense, right? Whereas tools could perhaps refer to specific messaging applications, you know, but in either case, there is barely ever a rights-based approach to how it is developed or how it is assessed. And the third way framing to look at ICTs is a feminist approach. a feminist approach, and I'm sure my colleague Namita might have shared that with you, fundamentally roots itself on the politics of power. So when this especially plays out in how technology is developed in AI, in coding, but also in the regulation of the internet. Um, so oftentimes, the way regulations are done, they often marginalize the economically weaker sections, um, persons with disability, because the power simply resides in the hands of those who have the privilege to be able to make those rules without much backlash per se, right? Or even develop technologies. For instance, it's an open reality that technological world is mainly male centered. So you often see AI that is deeply sexist in the way it is developed, because at the end of the day, AI also carries with it the biases of the people who develop it, right? So that's another frame. Now, where do you apply these sort of framing? And can someone let me know if something is happening in chat that you'd like me to respond to? And I'm happy to stop. And also if I'm talking too fast or not making any sense.
No,
In terms of
yeah, it's all well. Yeah, I'll bring attention to it in case once you went into the discussion. By the way, because since your session is not presentation, you can go ahead with because you are asking, so you don't feel stressed with the time. You have another 3 minutes. So feel,
okay, good.
question and answer. Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, then I don't have to rush. Now, those three framings that we talked about, right? But where do you apply? At what stage do you apply? Before even going into where do you apply it, let me give you an example of the approach to the internet. Right? One approach is internet as a public space. Another very important approach that's developing and has started receiving a lot of attention is looking at access to the internet as perhaps a fundamental right, as a human right. There are, of course, people who strongly agree with this argument. There are people who strongly disagree with this argument. And there are people who feel that, well, access could be an enabler to rights, or maybe access is a right. I don't know. There are people across the spectrum. But the support for access to the internet as an evolving right has become quite strong. You see legislation being submitted by private members in different countries, in the EU, in the US, but also in countries like India, for instance. There have been high court judgments that recognize access as a fundamental right. The Kerala High Court has recognized that. So it's also time for us to start looking at the internet perhaps as a right, and each one is of course free to make up their own mind about it. Now, where do you apply these approaches, right? So I think that this approach actually cuts across different aspects of technology, right from the development to the deployment to the regulation of it. So when we're talking about development of technology, we're talking about not just physical technology, right? It's also different aspects of it. Who are the people you consult? Who is it that runs in your mind when you're developing a technology? Whether you're doing sort of a rights assessment when you're doing it, whether you're checking biases within that technology when you're developing it. That's a very key question. Another one is in the exercise and enjoyment. The way sometimes we develop technology and we think it's going to do something, but it ends up doing something completely different. And perhaps one could argue that that's also a democratic process. But within every democratic process, there are safeguards, right? So the internet has to remain a safe space for women, for LGBTQI persons, for persons with disabilities, for indigenous persons. So right from the question of access, of who gets access, to who gets to use that access in a certain way. Are people safe from hate speech? Whether they're safe or not, are they able to access remedies if they're exposed to violence or are subjected to violence? So those are questions at the experience layer. And lastly, and the most importantly, is at the regulation layer that we have to be more careful. Because over the last few years, we've seen that a lot of regulation has come up and it hasn't really taken into account different persons, right? Especially who is the object and who is the subject of internet regulation is something that we have to think about. So I think I'm running out of time, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So let me just move to the last slide, which is about who are these people, who are these groups that we're talking about. And I don't have to explain these groups, and Gunella is going to go into disabilities anyway. But what I would appreciate is if in the chat, if you could point out if there are other groups that are missing in this list, besides persons with disabilities, minorities, whether it's sexual minority or religious minorities, persons with different non-compliant gender, linguistic groups that are not from the majority. People, and I talked about it, it's also people from rural areas versus urban, mountainous areas versus flat terrain, and of course, economics, no? The well-off and the not well-off.
Yeah.
Are there any other ones that you can think of?
Yeah, Ashwad, it was mentioned refugees, IDPs, refugees.
Yeah. So you see, for instance, in Myanmar, refugees are clearly discriminated against, right, in the access and enjoyment. Let me see, IDPs too. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's important that we think about these groups, is what I'm saying.
Thank you, Gayatri. Maybe at the end we'll have 1 minute to wrap up things. So let's move to the second presentation. May I ask the Zoom volunteer to upload the Ganella's presentation?
Yeah, sure. I'm just sharing here.
Yes, great. Ganella, she's the disability policy reference, as she was among the first who were able to share her experience at the internet governance space. Currently, she's IGF MAG member and the coordinator of the Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability. By the way, the first session I was exposed to at the internet governance is back in IGF 2009, where I attended her session before knowing her. So that was it. She exposed me to these issues that she will be sharing with us on the global policies and on disability and accessibility. May we can put the volunteer put the timer for a minute, and the floor will be yours, Ganella. Once they put the time, so not to give you enough the right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
The time is not yet reset. I want to give you your time. No, don't want to. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Sorry. So already run. I will consider that. Go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Nadira. And thank you very much for the introduction and the opportunity to speak at APSIG. I've seen APSIG grow over the years and mature, and it's wonderful to be part of it. Yes, I have been involved with disability advocacy and internet governance for many, many years. And next slide, please. We are, am I changing? Yeah, thank you. The United Nations actually calls people with disability the world's largest minority group. There are well over 1 billion people with disabilities worldwide, and 80% live in developing countries, according to the World Health Organization. And this is estimated about 15% of any country's population have a disability. People with disability are marginalized in many countries, and there are many cultural and economic barriers to active participation in the general community, let alone technology and the internet. There are limited educational opportunities. We heard from Nadira before the session started about what's happening in her country, but that's not unique. There are many issues in many countries where people with disabilities are sidelined when it comes to education and employment. Next slide, please. And accessibility to technology and the internet for people with disabilities can really break down the barriers and open up opportunities. And that's the key to what we're talking about today. And following on from what Gertieri talked about in regard to diversity and inclusion. Next slide, please. So a key policy driver is the UN, United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This convention has been ratified by over 180 countries. So it's a well-recognized convention, and there are a number of obligations on countries called states parties to improve the rights of persons with disabilities. And one of them is the obligation to implement measures to design, develop, produce, and distribute accessible ICT at an early stage. So these become accessible at minimum cost for people with disabilities, because we have to make sure that the internet and accessibility to the internet is affordable by people. If they live in a city, if they live in the country, we have many issues with that. This is called Article 9 on accessibility as part of a UN convention. And the mechanism is that a country signs or ratifies the convention, and then it needs to implement it, and it needs to report to the United Nations every few years as a government, but also there's what's called a shadow report that is done by the community to ensure that there is actually action. So what I'm trying to emphasize here is it's one thing for a government to ratify this particular convention. It's another thing to put it into action. And that's what we need to see. That's what we need to see happen. And that's what we'll be talking about. So next slide, please. And one of the ways of doing this is web accessibility and usability. So this underpins accessible online service delivery. So if governments are producing more services and tools online and expect the general population to make use of those for all sorts of things. It could be getting government benefits. It could be being able to access some other service, access to land, whatever it might be. If that is just available online, there are going to be significant people who are disadvantaged. So there is what's called the W3C Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG for short, version 2.1. This has been implemented and adopted by many governments, and to a certain degree of success, but there's still a long way to go. And certainly in the commercial sector, there's even a longer way to go. And to make sure that this works in the best possible way, the design and the testing of websites and mobile apps need to be tested with users. This is users with disability. That makes a huge difference. So we'll go to the next slide. And so we're talking about nothing about us without us. And the disability movement has this approach of involvement. So if there's something being talked about accessibility for persons with disability, well, it doesn't make sense if a person with a disability or a group of persons with disability aren't involved in that decision-making, design, whatever it might be. Because persons with disability can explain through their own experiences the online barriers and how governance structures can reduce those barriers. So that interaction is key. And we'll hear from Mohammed Shabir in the next presentation of his experience of various online services and applications. Next slide, please. So there are a couple of current internet governance groups on accessibility. These are two that both Mohammed Shabir and I'm involved with or leading, and there are others, but I would just like to mention, if this is an area that you would like to be involved with, contribute to, or learn from, I would encourage you to join the Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability, and the URL there for people with vision impairments who can't read the slide maybe is igf-dcad.org/welcome. And the other one is the Internet Society Accessibility Special Interest Group, and you can access that at www.a11ysig.org. So you're very, very welcome to join that, and I welcome any questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, excellent, on time. So now we have 3 minutes for you can ask and ask issues and discussion and with Ganella. Go ahead. I would like to hear from you, our esteemed participant. No questions? So maybe at the end, when we put things together, we can some questions can be raised as well. Thank you, Ganella. And even with this presentation, some of the information also new for me as well, as always. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll move now. Maybe at the end we'll have overall discussion, a few minutes for discussion. So we move now to our third part. Is with us is already you heard his name, Mohammed Shabir. He's a researcher and right activist. He is the founding president of the Internet Society Accessibility Special Interest Group, and anybody can join it, by the way. Shabir has a number of publications in the domains of international relations and internet governance. So he will share his experience, the approach Ganella already mentioned what Shabir will be sharing with us about the accessibility in to be related issues, to be specific, for example, and providing us examples of certain platforms like Uber, Careem, Dares, and so on. So may I ask I will put the time, and Shabir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadra. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. The good thing about being the last speaker is that most of the content or the background is already covered. And I am thankful to Gayatri and Ganella for doing this for me. So I don't have to go back into the inclusion and disability and instrument discussion. And we can move directly to the experience that people with disabilities have in different domains while they access the interact with the internet and broadly speaking digital technologies. Because the line between internet and digital technologies even is now blurred. You have devices which are directly connected, which may be online, but you as a human may not be directly connected, but you may be benefiting from those devices and those technologies. Before I go into the experience sharing, I would just like to re-emphasize the point that it is not just the minority who are people with disabilities. It's 15% of the world population, over 1 billion people, which is comparable to the population of China or India. So it's a huge people, even for a country which has not much population, but considering that if 10 to 15% of your workforce is dependent and they are not enabled, they become burden on your economy. And last but not the least, we have already been hearing about human rights and rights-based approach. So it's necessary, keeping in view that I have an international relations background. So in international relations and politics, things work differently. So there could be a selfish model where in people who are in the decision-making circles, who have the power to take decisions, they may take decisions in the benefit of their own economy and in the interests of their own states. I, as a student of international relations and as an activist, have had experience of formulating policies as well, particularly in Pakistan. We just launched a Digital Pakistan policy back in 2018, of which I was a part. We'll come back to this thing that once so there are different levels of deficiencies. Sometimes there are not policies, uh, sometimes there are policies but they are not implemented. Gunilla talked about the difficulties in ratification of CRPD, but certain states, almost 180 countries out of 191 have joined this CRPD, and if this CRPD was implemented in its letter and spirit, there would not be an accessibility issue. But we see that there are still issues, since we are talking about these issues here at this forum. So different platforms, as a person with visual impairment myself, I have worked and used different platforms I use daily. These include ride-hailing services, food services, banking, e-commerce, email, messaging, and all those services which an iPhone user or a smartphone user may use. My experience has been varied in terms of the accessibility of apps. For instance, the banking app that I use, which is the local bank in Pakistan, that app is about 90% accessible. Why I'm saying about 90% accessible? Because there are still a couple of points where I may face some difficulty in terms of seeing the financial statements. It is not shown as an accessibility as a person with visual impairment would like to see. But still, the key components of with regards to the financial transactions, bill payment, and all that, using those services that can be used. There is another app. I'm not sure if it is available in other countries or not. Food Panda, which is an app using which food can be called, and this can be uh, uh, called through different restaurants, and it can be ordered. This app recently has been made inaccessible to some extent. Earlier it was accessible, but as the developers keep updating apps, sometimes the accessibility or disability considerations they may lag. With regards to Kareem, unfortunately, for the last 6 or 7 months since the COVID situation started, the app has been made to some extent inaccessible as well. Not completely. People can call rides, but still there are a number of features which have been made inaccessible. Lastly, with regards to policy making and implementation, it is not just the responsibility of a developer to make the web app accessible. I often say that it is the responsibility of the organization to ensure their platform is accessible. There is no excuse, because this is a world which is being created and evolved by and through the human interaction. It is not a natural world. It's not a world like Earth, where there may be different kind of trains and different geographical situations which may or may not be made accessible, or if they can be made accessible, there would be a lot of costs involved. In this virtual world, uh, the accessibility can be a part, but this can only be if the organization keeps the accessibility consideration right from the start in their plans, and then implements it in the execution of their projects. Uh, we have been here in Islamabad with the support of ISAC Islamabad chapter in close contact with Ministry of Information Technology and Pakistan Telecommunication Authority, due to which we were able to inculcate or to
Yes.
yes.
In fact, we are reaching at the end. We have only 2 minutes to the session.
Okay, I will take 30 seconds, Nadra.
Yeah. No, I want just to direct you, because I was curious to ask you about the cost. Individual member has to incur, it's because it's difficult, more expensive to use the internet than any other users. This is another issue. I think you need to touch base on it. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, exactly. The cost of technology is a key area which is already highlighted by Nadra, and I agree. For instance, if you want to make a computer accessible for a people who is visually impaired, a professional level software costs like $800 to $1,000, which is under less than half an amount you can buy a very sophisticated machine. So this is kind of I would say the cost is also a factor, but before we also need to address the cost, but before that we need to streamline our policies. We need to change the thinking, that we need to change the thinking that yes, accessibility is there, people with disabilities are there, and if we enable them, if we include them in the processes, in the economic circles, this will benefit not just the people who are for whom these services are, but this would benefit the state and the society overall. Lastly, I would just mention that if a platform is made accessible for a people with disability, it is also easier for people without disabilities to use, and it does not hamper their interaction with the device. So it doesn't harm anyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shabir. May I ask Gayatri and Ganila to say the last word and excuse us, our participant, for eating from your break time. Thank you. Gayatri?
Nadia, sorry to interrupt you. We can actually have 5 minutes for question and answer.
Yes, yeah. Well, but let's hear first from our like kind of closure of the issue from our esteemed speakers. Gayatri?
I don't have much to add, but other than to say I hope the internet gets incrementally more inclusive every day.
Thank you. Ganela?
Yes, I think there's a lot of different strategies to move forwards, but it's a matter of everyone working together, being it from government, NGOs, industry, using policy, legislative and regulatory mechanisms. That's probably all I can say at the moment. Thank you.
Yeah, togetherness, we will make things work. Anybody from our participant have a say?
Yes, I am Dr. Bhatt. Hello.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, my saying is that we should empower the digital policy. From that level, we can empower this the gap what we find or discussing here.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you. Thank to our esteemed participant as well and the speaker, and thanks. And it was pleasure having you with us here, Gayatri, Ganela, and Shabir. We're looking forward to see you in other events and maybe future collaboration with more elaborate on the issue. Thank you. See you in the second session. Bye-bye.
Thank you.